What's up, you guys? We are back on Food for Thought. I am your host, as always, Lindsay, and next to me is my co host, Victoria. Hold on to your hearts, guys, because today we have a very good episode.
Today we will be talking about the circulatory and respiratory system.
This reminds me of a biology project I did freshman year. We had to choose a system in the body. I chose circulatory, of course, that's why it reminds me. And we had to create a diagram out of random household objects. And I used a sponge for the heart and red and blue string for all the capillaries and veins and everything like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, that once again proves my co-host is a giant nerd. Moving on, let's get started.
Don't get your capillaries all twisted. I was just telling a story.
It was a heart-wrenching story. I'm so touched.
Wow. Thanks.
Let's actually get started, guys.
As I mentioned before, capillaries are the smallest type of blood vessel in the body. There are two other kinds, arteries and veins. Arteries pump the most blood, meaning they have the largest amount of muscle around them, and veins pump a moderate amount of blood with a decent share of muscle, and capillaries are the little tiny guys that have no muscle, but just endothelium holding them together, and they don't pump nearly as hard as arteries or veins.
Seeing as they all have different levels of blood resistance, there are different outcomes if one of them gets damaged. If a capillary ruptures and breaks open, it is something you should go to the doctor about. It is not a dire situation since it doesn't carry much blood. An artery, on the other hand, is a major blood vessel that hosts so much blood that if it were to break, you'd definitely know and you'd have to go to surgery immediately. These three structures are part of a thing called a closed circulatory system. Arteries and veins are found closer to the heart because it has higher pressure, and capillaries are the tiny ones that flow into small areas of your body.
A closed circulatory system is something all vertebrate have, where blood is circulated from the heart around the body through these blood vessels into the heart again. There is such thing as an open circulatory system where blood goes through the heart and into different chambers, so to speak, of the body. It just means the blood isn't contained by vessels and kind of freely goes through and pumps through the body. This is mainly found in arthropods.
A closed system is great because it allows for much power and pressure for blood to be pumped. Bigger creatures would need that force, whereas smaller things like those arthropods would not.
Also, it's very good for getting not only blood but oxygen around the body, which, as we all know, is greatly needed, although it is a very complex system of many, many vessels and components. And because it requires more power and pressure, it requires a lot more energy, and we all know that is not on an endless supply.
This whole process begins with the heartbeat. If the heart isn't regulated and pumping blood, everything else will come crumbling down.
The medulla oblongata in the brain, its nerves control the heartbeat and breathing. These messages go down into the heart, and the SA and AV nodes control the passages or valves that allow blood to pump through the heart. Certain hormones created in the brain can allow adrenaline to make your heart race. That's what you feel when you're on a roller coaster or are really nervous. Drugs like caffeine will skyrocket your blood pressure and heartbeat because it gives you that huge jolt in energy. Of course, there are other drugs that can slow down your heart rate, and they have their own deadly side effects as well. Your heart isn't beating, you basically aren't living at that point. You have way too much energy and your heart is pumping way too much, it will start to deteriorate early and you will eventually crash.
Focusing on node activity. With the arrhythmias, that is where there's an issue with your heartbeat and rhythm, whether it means your heart is beating too fast, too slow, or is very irregular. Your AV and SA nodes will help set the rate and timing of your heart and help blood go through your lungs and body. If you have the arrhythmias, it affects the rate of your SA and AV nodes and how they work. The transmission of your heartbeat through accessory fibers help work with your AV node. In your AV node, you send signals to ventricles through Purkinje fibers, which are cardiac muscles to help create electrical impulses for contractions. The signals then goes to the apex of the heart, which causes both the ventricles to pump blood. How we read these contractions, we use an EKG. An EKG is short for electrocardiogram, which measures the electrical current of the SA and AV nodes. Similar to that, there's also a blood pressure, which is crucial to knowing.
Blood pressure is the measure of how much blood is being pumped by your heart and through your blood vessels. It fluctuates based on circumstances like not exercising enough, emotional state, stuff like that. It's stated in one number over another number, systolic pressure over diastolic pressure. Your systolic pressure is the high point of the EKG graph where your heart is contracting. Diastolic pressure is that resting period where your heart isn't contracting.
The common number you see is 120 over 80, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with.
My family has a trend of high blood pressure, fun fact.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. I know someone who recently went to the hospital. Their blood pressure was through the roof and they were losing blood from a wound.
Oh no, did they at least get donor blood to survive?
Unfortunately, no. No one knew his type, but he kept a good attitude, telling all of us to be positive, be positive. What a kind soul.
I don't think he meant be positive, Victoria, in terms of thinking positively. I think that was his blood type.
Well, it's too late for that now.
Maybe I should educate you on blood types instead of the listeners. Seems like you and those doctors need it.
Please do.
There are many different blood types. There's A, B, O, and AB. We have these different blood types based on antigens and antibodies found in our cells.
So, for example, if you have blood type O, you can donate to any type, but only receive from O. If you have A, you can receive from A or O and donate to A or AB. If you have B, you can receive from B or O and donate to B or AB. But if you have AB, you can receive from any type and donate to only AB.
The liquid portion of your blood, however, is called plasma. It is created with 90% water, and it helps maintain water concentration and pressure and acts as a buffer. Hemoglobin is also a part of your blood, and it carries oxygen and carbon dioxide since plasma doesn't have the ability to do so. It carries iron as well for that oxygen binding process. If hemoglobin wasn't able to take away that oxygen or carbon dioxide, you could possibly get poisoning, and that would have obvious bad effects on your body.
Your body consists of red blood cells and white blood cells. The red blood cells are called erythrocytes, and their role is to carry oxygen to tissue using hemoglobin and iron. The white blood cells are called leukocytes, and there are 5 different types. They help protect the body from infectious diseases.
Each white blood cell has a specific role in immunity and defenses. Monocytes are first responders to infections. Neutrophils fight bacterial infection. Basophils alert to allergies. Eosinophils fight viral infections, and lymphocytes help immunity to disease.
Along with that, your body has very few platelets in your system. They are only made of when they're needed, and they come from pieces of bone marrow cells. They help function in clotting. They place themselves onto damaged tissue, and fibers plug to slow any bleeding. With that, fibrin is formed, and that helps add to platelets to make a clot.
So when you cut yourself, that's what's happening. All these components are coming together to make sure no infection gets in and your blood stays where it should be, which is in the body.
Next, we have the respiratory system. So this will help teach you about how the lungs work. Let's start off by defining a few key terms.
Total lung capacity is how much air the lungs can hold. The vital capacity is the total amount of air that can be moved by the lungs. Lastly, you have the tidal volume, so how much air you breathe, also known as every normal breath you take.
Each breath, it follows the path of airflow. So with this, air can either enter your nostrils or your pharynx, which is the intersection of food and air. Your glottis controls what the path is open. When the glottis is open, air goes to the lungs, but when it is closed, food goes to the stomach.
Once air passes into the larynx, your muscles contract to make sounds on exhale. After that, it goes into the trachea and branches off into 2 bronchi. Those 2 tubes are what lead to the lungs, and after the bronchi branch into the bronchioles, which are even smaller tubes. Those bronchioles narrow into alveoli, where oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchanged. Oxygen leaves the lung chambers into vessels, and the carbon dioxide leaves cells into the lungs.
We as mammals use a negative pressure breathing system. It is where air is sucked in by us and contracts our diaphragm down to hold air into our lungs. A positive breathing system would be the opposite, where air is forced into your lungs by an outside source to reach the alveoli.
Y'all should see me when I'm in gym class. My breathing patterns and heart rate probably look insane. It's partly because I'm out of shape and partly because my anxiety, all with surrounding people watching me play sports, it's through the roof.
I mean, I probably look like I'm having an asthma attack in gym class.
Trust me, I'm the same way. Actually, we should tell them about how asthma really works. Well, a person with asthma has a smaller or more inflamed pathway to their lungs, and that causes the coughing or wheezing we all know about.
Right, it's easy for them to breathe air in, but it's hard to get the air out.
Now that we have bored you all to sleep today, let's finally mesh all this information together.
So far, we've talked why your heart beats and why you breathe, but now we're going to talk about the process of when the circulatory system meets with the respiratory system.
There are 2 types of flow patterns: pulmonary flow, which is dealing with your heart and lungs, and then your systemic flow, which deals with body tissues.
We've been talking about the heart's beating patterns and the blood that pumps through our body, but let's finally get to what the heart has to do with that.
Beginning at the right atrium, it sends deoxygenated blood to the right ventricle. Once the right ventricle contracts, that blood goes to the lungs via the pulmonary artery, where high CO2 and low O2 in blood diffuses. After that leaves the lungs via the pulmonary vein, it returns to the heart and goes to the left atrium. The SA node then signals contractions, and blood then leaves the left atrium for the left ventricle. During all that, oxygen is being carried.
Next, the AV node on the left side signals to contract and blood leaves the body via the aorta, passing through various tissues to drop off oxygen and picking up carbon dioxide. After that, it returns to the heart via the vena cava and enters the right atrium. The entire process will then start over once again.
It's pretty crazy to realize how much is happening with your heart every second. They're definitely right when they say it's a complex system.
They really are. Well, guys, I think that's all we have for you today.
If we tried to force feed you any more information, y'all would probably have an actual heart attack, and we don't want to get sued. We have no money.
You are very right. Anyways, we will catch you guys on the flip side.
Comment down below what you guys want us to talk about next, or if you have any questions about what we talked about today. I know it's an earful. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a good day. Cause, please give us an A.